You know you need a fly rod, a reel, some line, and of course some flies to start fly fishing. But if you've ever walked into any outdoor store, you know there is a ton more gear for sale. Do you really need those $300 pliers? And what about those $500 sunglasses? And I know you might look amazing in that custom-made hat, but is it really going to help you catch more fish? And don't even get me started on all the fly rods. The only thing more overwhelming than starting out in fly fishing is landing a man on the moon. Now, I'm no scientist, but this week on Untangled, you're going to learn about all the gear that's just a distraction and the stuff that you actually need out on the water. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant, back for yet another week of podcast excellence. And this week we're going to be chatting about one of my favorite topics. As those who've followed the show for a little while are acutely aware, I'm a bit of a gear nut. I think you could describe me that way. I love fly fishing gear. I've got way too much of it, especially fly rods. I've got over 40 fly rods in the room with me right now on the other side of the camera here in the podcast studio. It's not good. You can't fish with 40 rods at once. So as much as I love them, it's gotten out of hand. But I just love the gear. I love collecting it. And then I've done gear reviews for over a decade now for a bunch of different magazines in the fly fishing industry. So I feel like I've got something to contribute to this conversation as we go through the rabbit hole of gear. And what I wanted to do today is really just give you all my honest 2 cents on the gear that you don't need, the gear that's a waste of your money, that is not going to be the difference between you catching a fish and not catching a fish. There are instances where your gear will get in the way of that. If you go out and you buy a 10-weight rod, for example, and you want to try and fish trout with that, you're going to have a really hard time getting that 10-weight to work because 10-weight rods, they're very stiff, they're very heavy, they're made for saltwater fly fishing. And then you take that extremely heavy, stiff rod, the very heavy line that's not designed to cast size 16 parachute atoms, and you're going to run into a lot of issues trying to get that gear to work on the water. So when I say that gear can get in the way of you catching fish, that's what I mean. It's not me sitting here and trying to tell you, well, you see, if you buy this $1,200 fly rod, the fish are just going to jump in your net. They're going to respect you so much. No, that's not where I'm going with it at all. It really is make sure you've got the right gear for the situation that you're fishing in, and then everything clicks. So that's what I'm trying to help y'all understand today and just get my perspective on it. And then we will end with a quick list of the essential gear, so the stuff you actually need if you want to start out fly fishing, and that'll be right at the end. So let's get right into it. First piece of gear that I think you don't need, it's waste of money, are those really expensive pliers or nippers. If you all have seen those for sale around, there's a couple, I think they're selling them for like $300. They're real nice. They're made out of like titanium harvested from an asteroid that was whizzing by the moon, and they've got jaws made out of shark teeth so they never dull. No, I don't know about that part, but they're really fancy. They're bougie. But do you actually need those? Is that going to do anything for you? You know, they cut line just the same as a cheap pair of nippers does. But unlike the cheap pair, when you lose those real expensive ones, your wallet's not going to reach up and slap the crap out of you. Okay, you can lose the cheap ones and you'll be just fine. You'll be, oh, that's a bummer. I got to find some other way to cut this line today. It's not, oh, crap. I just lost. $300 isn't a car payment anymore because cars are ridiculous money. But it used to be a car payment back in the day. Crap. I lost a car payment's worth of nippers right there. Nobody wants to say that. So it really is just, if you want them, go for them, but there's no real reason to drop that kind of money on them. Even the more reasonable, like $90 nippers are way too much. Now, the caveat here, I will say, is if you're a guide and you're guiding 200 days a year and you're fishing all the time, having a really nice pair of nippers could be something you could talk yourself into, just because they're going to last super long. They're going to be a lot more durable. The cheaper stuff's not going to last as long, but at the end of the day, you buy $15 nippers, and that's what? 30, 60, I can't do math, $75, and you're still not even, you're barely a third of the way to that $300 one. Yeah, so it's fine to buy the cheap ones, because you're still not going to, even though they'll wear out, you're still going to have a really hard time losing or spending enough to add up to that $300 mark. But as a guide, I could see it making sense. I never did. Even when I was a guide, I just used the Dr. Slick mitten scissor clamps. That's all that I used. That's all that I still use. They're my favorite nippers, and I think they're like $15, maybe $20. So then I get a new pair every couple of years, and they last great, unless I drop them in the lake like I did this year. So that was no fun. And it was the pair that my wife got me for our anniversary, so that wasn't very fun anyways. But anyways, the real expensive ones, the reason they cost so much money, they use very high quality materials. A lot of them will use magnets instead of springs to keep the jaws apart, so you have fewer parts that could wear out and fail. And then the cutters themselves can be really, really high quality metal that very rarely dulls, if it ever does dull at all. And they'll be able to cut through wire leaders, backing, in addition to tippet and leaders and whatnot. So it's nice to have all those features and functionality, but again, if you lose them, they're not going to do you much good, and then you're out $300. I'd much rather just lose a $15 pair of nippers and call it a day. And I've never had an issue with mine cutting line, cutting tippet, or crushing barbs on hooks. So I wouldn't worry too much about spending money on that. Just get an affordable pair. You'll be in business. Now, the next thing that is a waste of money is cheap fly boxes. Now, what I mean by cheap fly boxes, I know that some fly boxes can be a little bit more money, like in that $30 to $40 range. Some can even be a little bit more expensive than that if you get the custom-made wood ones. But I used to be the feller who'd walk into the fly shop and I'd see the $35 and $40 fly boxes, and I'd go, who needs to spend $40 keeping their flies? That's the sucker right there. It ain't carp. It's the people who buy those fly boxes, I'll tell you that. And I went ahead and I bought the ones that were $5 or $10 or whatever it was. It was cheap. And let me tell you, that was a bad decision, folks. I had a cheap box. I remember buying it for literally, it was $4 on sale. And it was just cheap plastic. It had the compartments, so there was no foam or silicone slots for the flies to go into, just little compartments you drop all the flies in. And I was out fishing. It was February. It was like 14 degrees outside. And it was so cold that when I opened that fly box, the plastic clasps holding it shut snapped, and the lid flew open, and all of my flies dumped straight into the river. And you don't know pain until you have tried to rescue all your flies when the air temp is 14 degrees, the water is who knows how cold, and you're scooping them up by the handful, and your hands just feel like giant blocks of ice. It was terrible. I lost so many flies. That box was not worth the money. It was terrible. So I got done with that trip. I went home, and I spent $30, and I got a nicer fly box. And let me tell you, I have not looked back. That is one thing that is worth the money. Okay, you want something that's got a secure lid, that's solid, and it's well built, so that you don't run into the similar situation where you open it and boom, all your flies are gone. Because you lose all your flies, you really can't fish the rest of the day if you don't have flies. They're kind of integral to this whole fly fishing endeavor. Now, the nicer boxes, what I mean by that, is just the ones that have the silicone or the foam slits where you slide the flies in and out of them, so that even if you drop the box or you open the box upside down, your flies are held in there securely enough that they don't all just fall out. That's the last thing you want to have happen. And a lot of them are also going to be waterproof, so that if you drop the box in the river or it rains a lot and your vest or your sling pack gets wet, then your hooks don't rust out which is another problem you can have with those cheap boxes. They're not waterproof. And again, they'll open and close securely, so you don't have to worry about the lid coming undone. The mechanisms are usually a lot higher quality, so you don't have to worry about them breaking when it's 14 degrees outside. And a lot of these nicer ones, they'll even have little magnetic pads for your really tiny nymphs in there, which is a nice touch. They're just a lot more user-friendly. They're more durable. They are worth the extra money. The super cheap ones, in my experience, just haven't been worth it. Next thing, reels over $500. I might catch some grief here, and I'm fully prepared for that, for the angry comments, but I've felt this way for a long time, that reels over $500 are just too much, and that really most fly reels for trout fishing are just too expensive. Now, I am a complete hypocrite here, because I am on record in many places, in some gear reviews, and I think on this podcast too, stating that the Orvis Mirage is my favorite trout reel of all time. And I'll stand by that. With one caveat. The reason I love that Mirage so much is because I've used it for a lot more than just trout. It's handled sockeye salmon, wild native rainbows, Dolly Varden in the ocean, 28-inch cutthroat trout. It has done a lot, and then it's also done a lot of just regular trout fishing, and it's been solid, super dependable that entire time. And I love it really just because of how well it's worked for such a wide variety of fish. And it's just a very solid, very good reel. There's some nostalgia built into that because I've caught some amazing fish with it, but it's also $598 is what it retails for, which is just ridiculous. And at the end of the day, I look at it and then I look at my Ross Animus that I've had for a long time, and that's $385, which is still pretty spendy, but between the two, it's really hard to tell much of a performance difference if I can really narrow it down at all. So I say all of that to make my next point. I've used these fancy reels. I really enjoy them, but I'm telling you, yeah, they're really not worth the money. And I say that because I watched Alex catch a 24-inch brown and a 25.5-inch rainbow within the last year on the reel that we sell with our rods here at VFC. And is it the nicest reel in the world? No, but it's machined aluminum, so it's strong. Cast aluminum can crack. It can be it's not as durable. So machined aluminum is going to stand up to abuse a little bit better. It's got a good drag system, a nice sealed drag, a disc drag, so I can adjust the pressure on it when I need more pressure or less pressure, depending on the fish that I'm fighting. The drag knob's easy to operate. It's got a nice large arbor, so that means when I reel it in, it's picking up a lot of line per spool revolution. It does everything I need it to do. It's a great little reel. And yeah, does it look as sexy on the rod as that silver Ross Animus that I've got? No, but it doesn't matter what it looks like, right? You want something that functions. And then, yeah, you can go spend on a nicer reel if you get into this and decide, oh yeah, I love fly fishing and you want it, go do it. But you don't need, especially as a beginner, there's no need to go spend more than $500 on a trout reel, okay? It really is overkill. It's just in that vein, I've got a buddy, one of the fishiest guys I know, and he catches everything on a Shakespeare knockoff of the old Pfluger Medalist, the old classic-looking click and pawl fly reel, if you've ever seen those things. And he catches tons of big fish with that stinking reel. So, it just goes to show that it's a lot more about the angler and knowing how to play fish than it really is about the reel itself. So I would focus on getting a reel that's got a disc drag, one that's made from aluminum. You don't want a plastic reel. Those are super cheap, and they just cause more problems than they solve. They break very easily. They can freeze up in the cold. I've had plastic reels. They're not worth it. Spend a little bit more. Get a decent reel that, again, made out of aluminum, has a good disc drag in it. You can find a lot of those in that 150-ish range. And if you want to spend a bit more, you can get fancier looking ones, but you don't need to spend on those really expensive trout reels. As much as I love them and as great as they are, you just don't need them. So And speaking of things you don't need, another thing you don't need is ultra premium tippet and leader. Last time I was in a fly shop, I needed to go buy some leader. I was out, and I saw a 3-pack of leaders for sale for, I think it was more than $30, which just blew my mind that it was that much money. And they were this ultra premium, super mega Doppler leader that is super invisible and super strong. And it's trying to be like the Schwarzenegger of leaders because it's all that in a bag of chips. And you know, I've tried this stuff in the past. I've used it. I've done some reviews on it, and I don't see any difference. I haven't caught a fish with that leader that I wouldn't have caught with the leader that we use here at VFC and the tippet that we use here at VFC. It really is just the same stuff as the ultra premium fancy stuff, you know, and they might have some new coatings on it. They might make it a little bit stronger or whatnot, but at the end of the day, it's monofilament leader. I have yet to run into a situation where the fish have refused my flies and then I put on a different brand of leader and they eat it. It's almost always because, you know, presentation, and then the leader could be too big. I could be using 4X when I should be using 6X, but it's not because I was using this brand over that brand, especially not the ultra premium stuff. Just get the stuff that you can afford. You don't need to spend a whole bunch of money. And I know these companies have R&D costs to recoup. That's part of what is going to drive the cost up of some of these new leaders and tippets that are coming out. But again, I have yet to see those leaders outfish and outcatch the affordable stuff that I use all the time. So I wouldn't worry about spending a bunch of money there. Get the stuff that you can afford. You're not missing out on something, I promise. Another thing that you don't want to experience with gear is cheap wading boots. Now, I've worn cheap boots. It was awful because when I first really dedicated myself to fly fishing, I refused to buy any gear. I was like, I'm going to make do with what I got. So I got a pair of waders. I don't even remember where I got them from. And then instead of buying wading boots, I just snagged my uncle's old pair of hiking boots and said, I'm going to make these my wading boots. These are just fine. And they actually lasted a lot longer than I thought they would, but they did eventually fall apart because they're not designed to be in the water all the time. So I broke down. I went to Sportsman's Warehouse and I dropped $50. I was a big spender on a pair of wading boots, and I got so excited because I said, finally, I got wading boots. I go out to the river with them. It was awful. They didn't fit well. They had awful traction. They were not comfortable, and they disintegrated after like 10 trips to the river. They just fell apart. The laces snapped. The glue went bad. It was just awful. So if you find wading boots for less than like $60 a day, just steer clear of them. I would spend a little bit more money here, spend about $150-ish at a minimum on boots, because you're walking in the river. You want to be able to feel solid. You want to be able to feel secure. You want to be able to move around in the river. When you hook into a fish that goes down or upstream, you've got to follow it. And again, you want to be comfortable and you want to be safe. And in cheaper boots, it's really hard to achieve that. Now, you don't need to go spend $500 on boots. That is not what I'm saying. But the really cheap boots are just, they really aren't going to be a comfortable experience. And if you're not comfortable, you're not going to fish well at the end of the day. It really is that simple. So spend a little bit more on the boots. You know, you're not buying those fancy leaders and nippers, so you can afford to spend a little bit on the boots, right? Another thing to steer clear of are going to be the cheap fly assortments from non-fishing stores. If you've ever seen flies for sale for cheap somewhere like Walmart or the gas station down by the lake, don't waste your money, because that's all. You're throwing your money away, because those flies, they're not even real patterns. They're just a bunch of flashy feathers tied on hooks to imitate flies. The hackle's oversized. It's often the wrong kind of hackle. They're put together with terrible thread. If you do manage to catch a fish on these flies, they'll last for maybe 2 fish. Okay. The big issue here is a lot of those cheap fly assortments from non-fishing stores. They're not even imitating real insects. They are tied 100% to catch the angler and not the fish. And that's not what you want. You want something that's going to catch the fish. So spend a little bit of money on the flies. You don't have to go spend $5-6 a fly, but spend a little bit of money on flies. Get stuff that actually imitates the insects that fish are going to eat. And you're going to be in a much better situation because these are your lures. These are your bait, right? This is what's going to attract the fish. And so if you're using stuff that's not even remotely correct, I hesitate to say you're wasting your time because I don't think you're ever wasting your time when you're fishing, but you're going to be very frustrated by using stuff like that. Something else to not spend too much money on is expensive sunglasses. And this is another place where I'm a hypocrite because I wear expensive sunglasses. I love them. They're comfortable. They're light. I think I can tell a difference with the clarity and the color that I see through those lenses. But here's the caveat. I think I'm in the minority there. I don't know that a lot of other people can tell that difference. Alex doesn't, for one thing. And we both can spot fish equally well when he's got his cheap sunglasses and I've got my expensive ones. It's a good splurge if you want. I've found them to be, I don't know. I was about to say I've found them to be worth the money, but at the end of the day, I don't know. It's something that I spend enough time driving and I spend enough time fishing, and I'm a little uptight about my eye health because the last thing I want to have happen is to lose my eyesight or anything. So I'm willing to spend the money on the really nice stuff and get the best I can so that my eyes are in good shape. But from a fishing standpoint, if you're just getting a pair of sunglasses to wear on the water fishing, all you need are polarized lenses that are that brown or amber in color, and you'll be in business. That's all you need. And you can still find those for like $20 or $30 at a gas station. So I have personally found that they are worth the expense to me, but I know I'm in the minority there. So it's very hard for me to tell folks, yeah, go spend $300 on sunglasses when you're going to lose them, you're going to drop them, you're going to sit on them and break them, whatever happens to your sunglasses. I've been real lucky, knock on wood, that I haven't lost or broken a pair in a while. So hopefully I can keep that streak up. But it's, like I said, it's hard for me to tell folks, oh yeah, go spend your money on that. So the other thing I wouldn't recommend spending money on are the boot foot waders. So these are the waders with the boots already attached to them, so you don't have to buy a pair of boots. And you might think, oh, that's a great deal. That sounds awesome. But I've never met anyone, and I'm sure people out there exist. So if you do, drop a comment, let me know. But I don't personally know anybody who's bought these boot foot waders and have been happy with them, especially with the traction of the boots. If they're trying to hike around the river, they're trying to walk a little bit further to their spot, the boots are either great on the ground and kind of meh in the river, or they're okay in the river and they suck on the dirt. So that's been my experience with them. I have a hard time telling folks to go pop on that, especially when you can get the waders and then buy the boots separately, and you can get boots that'll be really good for a wide variety of things. It's just a much better, a lot more comfortable setup for walking in the rivers. And if you get a hole in your waders, you can just patch a hole in your waders. You don't lose your boots. If you get a hole in those boot foot waders and you can't really patch it, you've lost your boots too. So you can't even go fishing. So it's a setup I personally wouldn't use. Right. Another thing you don't need are the line straighteners. Okay. Little pieces of leather, or sometimes you see like a little bit of cotton cloth too, where you're supposed to run your leader through it or your tippet through it to get all the kinks out of it. You don't need them. Okay. All you need to do is just run that through between your thumb and your index finger. Just press and pull with your other hand. And you want to pull just enough to where you feel it heat a little bit. If it's burning your fingers, you're pressing and pulling way too hard. And if you apply that much heat will actually weaken and damage the leader and tip material a little bit. So you want to apply just enough to straighten it out. You do it with your fingers. It's a piece of cake. You don't need to waste money on a line straightener. The other thing you don't need to waste money on, it pains me to say this because I love them so much, but you don't need a million fly rods. You walk into that fly shop and you see fly rods for sale everywhere. You see a 7-foot 2-weight and a 6'9" 3-weight and a 10-foot 4-weight and a 9'9" 8-weight, and you think, I need them all. I got to get them all. I need every single one of these. I've been there, trust me. As great as it is to look at my fly rod collection, it doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't catch me fish. And especially when you're starting out, you just need to get the jack of all trades, the 9-foot 5-weight rod. Just get the rod that's going to do the vast majority of the fly fishing styles. And then once you get into this a little bit more, that's when you can start branching out and buying rods specifically for smaller dry fly fishing or tight line nymphing or streamers or whatever it is that you're interested in doing. So buy that 9-foot 5-weight to start out with, get the basics down, learn fly fishing, and then start branching out into other rods if you want. You don't need to, but you can do it if you want to. And last but not least, we've talked about all this gear that you don't need. And this, I've probably left some things out, but this is what really jumped to my mind. Now, what about the gear you do need? How do you figure that out? So I've just laid a whole bunch at you here. And really, it's simple. If you think about it, you need a rod, you need a reel, you need a line, tippet, and leaders. You need some split shot, you need some indicators, you need some nippers, you need a pack to hold all that stuff, you need a net for the fish, and then you need flies. It's really it. You need some sunglasses, and you might need some dry fly floating as well. So I forgot 2 little things. So there you go. Dry fly floating, sunglasses. But other than that, that's really your core group of stuff, because that ensures that you've got the gear you need to set up a nymph rig. If you want to fish nymphs, that you've got the gear you need to set up a dry fly or a streamer rig if you want to fish that way. And you don't have all this other stuff distracting you. You don't have all this other stuff begging for your attention. You don't have to sit there and wonder, okay, well, did I use this piece, or did I use this, or why didn't I use this? I bought it. Do I need it? And then you can just go with this very simple list. It eliminates all those other distractions so that you can focus on your job and your goal as an angler, which is to put flies in front of fish and make them look real. That should be where 90% of your focus is as a beginner. The other 10% is going to be on, rigs and casting and whatnot, but you want to be able to forget all those distractions and just focus clearly on putting flies in front of fish and making them look real. And when you narrow your gear list down to just the bare essentials, it makes it a lot easier to do that. And that's really all you need. And in fact, we even put all of that together. That's what our starter packs come with here at VFC. It's just the gear you need. You can swap out the fly collections that you want. There's a couple other little add-ons you can grab if you really want them. But that's what we try to do is, hey, here's this problem of beginners are way overwhelmed with gear. How do we help them so that it's just make it as simple as possible, go out there and focus on catching fish. So that's what's in the starter packs. And I'll throw a link to those in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast, if you want to go take a look at them. But it really is that simple, where you don't need more than that. If you go to the river with just that stuff, you're going to be in great shape. You're going to be able to start really fine-tuning your approach, getting into some fish, which, again, that's what we're all here for. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you learned some stuff. And if there's another piece of gear that you think we don't need, or you disagree with one of my takes, please feel free to leave a comment somewhere, and we'll be very excited to get into that discussion. But that wraps up the open of the show this week, and we are going to get right into the Q&A portion of this week's show. Now, every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, go ahead and send those on into us. There's a link to do that down in these show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Rob from Pennsylvania has got our first question, writes in and says, I started fly fishing a couple of years ago. I'm in my early 60s, and with the onset of arthritis in my hands and fingers, it makes it tough to tie flies onto my leader. I practice tying knots while watching TV and even switched to the Davy knot, which for me is easier, but still not easy enough. What is the downside to using something like the Rio fly clips to swap out flies? They seem like they would work very well for me. I could tie them on while sitting at home and just swap out flies when I'm on the river. I've just never seen anyone using them. Thanks for the help. Rob, good question. Thanks for sending it in. Rio does make a few of those fly clips, and they're sized all the way down for flies to a 16. So in theory, you could use them for nymphs down to that size. I don't think that would be the worst choice in the world. But I don't know that I would want them for my dry flies. And even on my nymphs, I'd still be a little leery of using them because I'm really wary of using clips because I don't want anything to potentially interfere with how that fly looks and moves in the water. Again, our job is put flies in front of fish and to make them look real. Are they going to look real with a little metal clip between them and the leader or the tippet? They might, but it's really hard for me to know for sure because I'm not underwater observing them, and maybe I need to bust out the GoPro and stick it underneath and compare the shots of the two. And it's very, very possible that I'm way too worried about it and that I'm making up an issue where one doesn't really exist. I fully admit that could be a possibility, but I would personally stray away from them on a very highly pressured river where the fish see tons of flies and they're very particular about presentation. That extra bit of metal might just not look real enough, and it might be enough to just throw the fish off a little bit. So I wouldn't ever use them there. Again, I might be worrying too much about this though. So that's entirely possible. I do know that a few of my friends around your age, what they'll do is they'll actually pre-tie lengths of tippet onto their flies, and then they'll just use that to do a quick surgeon's knot to their leader when they're out there on the water. I don't know if that'd be easier for you, but it might be might be worth playing around with if the surgeon's knot is a little bit easier to tie. The blood knot can be a pain in the butt, but you could try that too. I personally find the blood knot easier to tie than the surgeons. But that's just probably because I've done more blood knots than the surgeons anyways at that point. So that's one option that you've got. At the end of the day, I'd tell you, give those fly clips a try. I don't think that Rio sells them. People are using them. They're catching fish on them. I know that much, but I just don't know how much they're going to impact your flies. So I don't know enough to say that, go out there and do it. But if you're not catching fish like you normally do, is it the fly clip or is it something else? That's where I kind of hesitate to make any definitive statements for you. So give them a try. Definitely report back. Let me know how they work for you. Again, I wouldn't use them for dry flies. Nymphs, I think, makes a lot of sense, but for the dry flies, that extra little bit of metal is probably going to sink your dry a little bit quicker, and it's definitely going to throw off the presentation of the dry fly. For the nymphs, I think you could probably get away with it, and most likely you're going to be okay. So if you do use them, definitely let us know how they work out for you. I'd be really interested to know. So thanks a bunch. Appreciate it. Preston from Massachusetts has our next question, writes in and says, when streamer fishing, do you use an indicator? If you did use one, would it spook the fish when you strip in line since the indicator will drag across the water? That's a good question, Preston. And the short answer to that is no, you don't. When a fish eats a streamer, there's absolutely no denying it. You do not need the indicator to tell you that a fish is eaten. We use the indicators to give us a visual representation of what we can't see or feel when we're nymphing. When you are fishing streamers, you're in constant contact with that fly. So when a fish eats it, you are going to know. It's either going to feel like something just freight trained it, or you're going to feel a very distinct pull and tug on the line in between stripping that fly in, or when you go to move the fly again, something's going to have grabbed onto it and eaten it. You're not going to need that visual representation of the eat that you get with the strike indicator. Now, this being said, I do know quite a few folks who will dead drift streamers under an indicator, so they'll fish it essentially just like a nymph. They're using it to imitate a stunned or a dead bait fish, a crawdad. It can even imitate large stonefly nymphs if you really want it to. In fact, I caught a really large cutthroat. I think it was like a 26-inch cutthroat on a dead drifted streamer once. So it is a very effective way to fish these flies sometimes if you want to switch it up and do that. The other thing you can do with this setup is you can actually fish the streamer with very short retrieves in fast, choppy water, your shallow runs, and even some riffles you can fish these streamers in, because fish will be hanging out there. They're waiting to ambush bait fish that are in that area. You'll see a lot of sculpin and shiners and minnows darting around in those areas. And what the indicator will do in that instance is it's actually going to keep the streamer suspended at just the correct depth and keep it bouncing right on the rock so you're not getting snagged in them. And then it's also going to show you when the fish eats it, because when you're doing this technique, you're doing a mix of letting it dead drift and then stripping it in. So you'll strip it for a minute, let it drift so it looks like a stunned fish or a fish that's struggling, or you're just trying to make it look enticing to the trout. So there's going to be moments when you will have a slack line and you won't necessarily feel the eat because there'll be enough slack. And that's when that indicator moving will be a great indicator, that's why we call it that, of a fish eating your fly. So you can try this technique. It can be really effective in the right kind of water, especially when the fish are starting to get very aggressive in the fall before spawning. But that's really it. So yeah, you can use indicators with streamers, dead drifting them. And even then, I'll dead drift streamers sometimes under an indicator, and you can give it a little strip. It's really not going to scare the fish unless you're fishing in like 3 inches of water. But usually your streamers are fished deep, and a little disturbance on top of the water from an indicator moving is not really going to do much to the fish, if they even notice it at all. In fact, a good example of this is when you're out on lakes or still water, and one of my favorite rigs to do out there is to put a balanced leech and a chironomid underneath an indicator. And that balanced leech is just a streamer pattern. This is just a fancy lake version of a streamer pattern. And a lot of times you'll have tons of success by slowly stripping that in. And the indicator is keeping it at the right depth. And then those slow strips are also showing you, or those slow strips aren't showing you, sorry. They're giving a little bit of action to that fly. And then when you stop stripping and you just let it sit there for a minute, then that indicator shows you when a fish has come by and eaten it. So you're moving that indicator, but it's not scaring the fish, right? That's just another example of when you could use it. So good question, though. Thanks for sending it on in. Appreciate it. Deanne from Colorado has got our next question, writes in and says, I've learned so much from the podcast and YouTube videos. Thanks for all you guys do creating quality content. My question is about double dry rigs. How have you best found to set these up? Is it best to tie a larger dry fly followed by a smaller dry attached to the larger dry fly hook, or create a tag and attach the large fly to that? I noticed when I had the large dry fly followed by a smaller one and noticed I wasn't catching fish, despite being in an active hatch. But once I took the large fly off and just fished the single smaller one, I was catching trout left and right. So I'm wondering if my initial setup was creating drag or making the drift look unnatural. Thanks for all you do, and tight lines. Deanne, thank you for the kind words. Really appreciate it. Your assumption here was probably dead on. A lot of times in a double dry fly rig, it's easy to get drag on one or both of the flies, and that happens for a couple of reasons. You've either made your cast and the flies have landed in two separate currents, so one's moving quicker than the other, and then eventually they're just going to start pulling on each other, if that's the case. Or the flies have started in the same current, but they've drifted into different ones, and there's not enough distance between those two flies to keep them from pulling on each other. So that's why when I set up my double dry fly rigs, I go ahead and I use 18 inches of tippet in between the two flies. I've found that that's long enough that they'll be able to drift independently of each other, but not so far apart that the bigger dry fly loses its functionality as an indicator, essentially, for when fish eat that smaller dry fly, or that bigger dry fly can be what I call a sight fly. So you find the bigger dry fly, and then it's a lot easier to follow it to where your smaller one should be. And you can pick that smaller one out on the water a lot more easy if you've got that big sight fly up in front of it to help you find it. Okay. So when I set up a double dry fly rig, though, and it's during a hatch, it's usually what I'm doing is I want to fish a done version of the hatch that's coming off, so the adult version of those flies. And then I like to have the emerger version of that fly behind it. And since emergers sit lower in the surface film, it can be hard to see them sometimes. So that larger dry fly acts as an indicator. And if it moves unnaturally, I know that something ate my emerger. So it's a really slick little setup. And that's why I'm going to fish two dry flies, is because I want to give myself the opportunity to see the takes on my emerger. Sometimes I'll fish two dry flies just because I'm not sure. I'll see a lot of fish eating emergers. I'll see a lot of fish eating the duns. And so I'll throw both on because sometimes it will just kind of be snacking on both. I've used that tag system that you mentioned where you create a tag, tie your fly onto that. And so it's a piece of leader attached to your leader. I don't like the way they cast. I don't really like the way they drift. It's kind of a pain in the butt. So I don't fish my double dry fly rigs that way. All of my guide friends don't fish their double dry fly rigs that way. Everybody I know and everybody I fish with fishes their dry flies in tandem. So one tied to the bend of the hook in front of it. So the last thing that could be an issue with your setup is that maybe your first dry fly was a little bit too big and it was scaring the fish off. Okay, so that's something else to think about as well. My double dry fly rigs, even if I'm just using that first dry fly as an indicator for my emerger, or even if I throw a nymph on under, or not a nymph, because then it's a dry dropper. But if I'm just using it as an indicator for that emerger pattern, I am still going to use flies that are as close in size to what's coming off as I possibly can, because I want it to look and be as natural as possible. So if there's a blue-winged olive mayfly hatch, for example, coming off, and all the bugs that are hatching are size 18, I'll tie on a 16 parachute, which is pretty close. Then I'll put my 18 inches of tippet, and then on the end of that, I'll tie a size 18 sparkle dun or last chance cripple or whatever fly it is that I'm using to imitate that cripple or emerger. So I've matched the flies very closely in size. If I threw like a size 12 out when everything else is an 18, that might just be enough to make the fish not even have interest in anything else that's drifting by for a few seconds, because that could just be obviously fake to them. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Don't make your first dry fly too large. You don't want to spook them off. But thank you for the question, Deanna. Appreciate it. And that wraps up the Q&A portion of the show this week, folks. But don't go anywhere, because we've got the Live Real Life moment coming right up. Every week here at Untangled, we end the show by sharing stories and a picture from folks who are out on the water living real life. This is the stuff we live for, is to see you guys out there enjoying yourselves and having a great time on the water. So if you have a live real life moment you would like to share, you can send those in down at the link in the show notes, or if you're watching the video podcast, there is a QR code on the screen as well. And this week's live real life moment comes to us from Brendan, who writes in and says, "My second trip with Project Healing Waters fly fishing, a program that had already begun to change my life. It wasn't just about fly fishing, it was about the camaraderie, the purpose, the healing that comes with standing in moving water and focusing on something other than pain or the past. The first trip had been a learning experience, but this one would be unforgettable. The morning was cold, the kind of chill that stiffens fingers and makes you question your sanity. The creek was clear and slow, the kind of water that holds secrets. But for hours, nothing. Cast after cast, drifts that felt perfect, still no action. The morning stretched long, but the hope of that first fish kept me moving forward. After lunch, I decided to push upstream. That's when I saw him, a big rainbow, easily 18 inches, sunning himself just beneath the surface. He sat there unbothered as if he knew I was watching. I made my approach, careful, deliberate. Cast after cast, drift after drift, he wouldn't budge, not even after a few eggs gracefully made contact. Not spooked, just indifferent. Eventually, he faded into the current, and I took that as my cue to do the same. A few yards upstream, I found a seam where slow water met the faster current. I let my fly ride the line between them, 5 good casts, and then it happened. The line went tight. A flash of silver erupted from the water. My heart pounded as I fought my first rainbow trout on the fly for 5 to 10 minutes, but it seemed to last hours. The weight, the cold, the patience, it all came together in that moment. But the day wasn't done. I worked my way through pools and riffles searching for more. At the edge of a deep pool just before a bridge, I found the second fish. A strong fight, a beautiful trout, and a surge of confidence. The green light, I'd found the honey hole. Under the bridge, I landed a third. Drifting under the bridge, a fourth rainbow decided to join the fun and take a squirmy worm at the transition from shade to sun on the far side. 4 in total. This trip with Project Healing Waters fly fishing wasn't just about catching fish. It was about the journey, the persistence, the quiet moments that remind you why you're out there in the first place. My first big rainbow, my first taste of real success on the water, a day that will always stay with me, not just because of the fish, but because of what they meant. Brennan, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that part of yourself and part of your journey with us. I really appreciate it. Folks, it's going to wrap things up for us this week. Thank you so much for being here, for listening and watching to the show every week. It does more to help us out than you know. If you want to help us out even more, tell everybody you know about Untangled. Tell them about VFC. Share the word and rate and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it. The more ratings and subscriptions we get, the more folks we can help live real life. And that's our whole goal here at VFC. We want to have you guys out there enjoying yourselves and catching some fish. And speaking of that, it's about time to wrap up. So until next week, go spend some time on the water. Don't freeze yet. Hopefully it's not too snowy wherever y'all live. And until next time, live real life.